For the sake of all beings, wisdom, compassion, non-clinging awareness, Sadhu. Are there any questions or observations or insights that discoveries that you'd like to share?
Arising out of yesterday's assembly, there's a lot of processing going on, and I acknowledge and I celebrate your honesty and your courage in sharing the depth of your feelings about the comings in Christchurch. And so your leadership and our augmented by our response feels to be opening the way for the true state of affairs of the world to enter the heart of our retreat, and for the heart of our retreat to enter the true state of the world. And this is a blessing springing out of, born out of a tragedy. So my prayer is that this may become firm for the sake of all beings.
Sadhu. I was originally intending to spend 2 days on this section of the mantra, and then I thought, oh well, we'll just have to cancel deepening day on Monday and finish it there. And I've decided actually it would be better to deepen our experience, and I'm not going to try and cram in everything into one day that could be said in 2 days. And you know, as in a sense, as we're going through the sadhana, or I'm talking about literally, you know, from page 1 to page 2 to page 3 as we're going along, you might have a sense. It's like it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and so here with the section of mantra yoga, it gets bigger again, right? And so there is, mantra is obviously very much connected with voice, right? I mean, it's like, and speech and expression, right? And so, you know, how we express the, you know, now in a sense, imagine for a moment you've got a kind of a felt sense of the possibilities of this, and now speak them. Now enunciate them in all their rich potential detail continuously through the rest of your living. Mantra, right? And like that. And mantra doesn't just refer to you know, sounds and so on. Mantra can also be translated sometimes as teaching. You know, so for example, at the end of the Heart Sutra, where it goes, you know, this is the great mantra, the unexcelled mantra, you know, the par excellence mantra kind of thing, and it goes like this, gate gate paragate. You know, for years I saw that as just kind of typical sectarian braggadocio. You know, or sort of like, you know, there's lots of mantras, but this is cat's meow mantra, right? And then I expanded my understanding of the meaning of the word mantra, and discovered that actually can also mean a teaching. And so all of a sudden it sounded quite different. This is the great teaching, the unexcelled teaching, of form and emptiness and interbeingness and so on. Oh, that makes sense to me. This is not a braggadocio. This is a statement of fact. Right? And so, imagine for a moment, it's just a way of speaking, right? But you've moved your way through the sadhana, and you've come to the point of really feeling that you are a kind of living presence of this mystery that you're studying and learning about, that you might use the word Samantabhadra with, or might talk about the vast expanse of Mahayana and refer to the same things, right? And then in the midst of that, right, to begin to utilize the mantra as a way of, whilst dwelling in this state, to invite more acute discernment of various facets of this experience. Right? I want you to imagine, right, you're all familiar with the tanka that's on the last page, or the one that I painted, and the other day I had a clear fantasy of the next tanka, right? And I've decided that Mary said, I can tell Chani to do it. Chani, Sue's daughter, and she's studying tanka painting, right? And I thought, that's a brilliant idea. I'll suggest it to her. And so I want you to imagine, right, Samantabhadra, similar to the one I painted there, but imagine that it's maybe like 2 stories high, like it big. It needs to be that big to kind of get a sense of it. And this is not totally outrageous, because there is, I think, at the Monlam, or the prayer kind of cycle of prayer festivals, that they used to have in Lhasa, and they'd unfold this tanka down the side of the potala, which was like 3 stories high or whatever, so it's not a complete impossibility, right? People have done such things. And then I want you to imagine that the whole tanka, instead of it being a traditional tanka, which is a square tanka with Samantabhadra sitting there, I want you to imagine that the edge of the brocade is actually the edge of Samantabhadra's body. So there's nothing outside Samantabhadra. It's just Samantabhadra. Then I want you to imagine inside the heart of Samantabhadra, which is very big, because it's many stories high, is a perfect circle in the heart, right? And inside that circle, right, is a smaller Samantabhadra surrounded by stars and galaxies and all the creatures of the universe, a little bit like I tried to portray, right? But they're all pretty big on that scale. Then imagine inside the heart of each living participant in this portrayal, the hummingbird and the frog and the cell life and the plant and the farmer driving the tractor, or I'm just borrowing from that particular image. Imagine inside each heart is a Samantabhadra, right? And then imagine in the heart of each of one of those Samantabhadras is a sphere, and inside that sphere, in the very center, is a small Samantabhadra surrounded by the entire of the universe. Okay? Now, imagine you go like, those of you that have familiarity with kind of traditional Tibetan deity yoga practice, you might have a sense of like, well, what am I visualizing at this point? Well, imagine for a moment that you were visualizing what I just described, right? You have a sense of being both inside and surrounding, and that the functioning of your being, right, is actually the process whereby this arises. The process that is arising out of the functioning of your being is what the functioning of your being is meditating upon. It's, it's Escher's hands, it's the, right, this kind of sense. And you have a sense of just dwelling, right? It's all preceded by comfortable posture and smiling, breathing present and aspirations and refuge. And, you're in a sense reminding yourself of the profundity of this in the lived experience, and then boom, there we are. Okay? And then in the midst of this, without particularly trying to, if you focus on any one detail, it's quite often the rest kind of becomes obscure, you know what I mean? So wanting to somehow appreciate all the detail without obscuring anything, right? You're learning the art of kind of holding this lightly. It's like it's a translucent universe, right, of realms within realms, and it's functionings within functionings and so on. And then begin to, you need something to occupy your verbalizing mind, you see. That's partly what mantra is about, right, at a very extremely crude beginner's level way. It's like you have conversations going on in your mind. You verbalize about, am I doing it right, or do I have to do this, or I'd rather be off somewhere else, or what am I going to do when the retreat's over, or what should I have done before the retreat started but I neglected. We can, all this kind of words. So there's only so many words you can say at any one time, right? You might be able to imagine singing a song in your head and at the same time think about something different than the song. Probably lots of us can do that. But if you had, I don't think many of us could have a song going in our head while thinking about another song, and in that thinking of that other song we're thinking of something else again. That's too much, right? You can't handle that, right? So what we'll do is we'll say, instead of trying to fight with this demon of verbalization, which is taking you away from just the pure beingness, right? We'll give you something to say, right? You can say, Om Samantabhadra Sammakaya Sarvadharma Mahameta Vajrabhumi Dhammadhatu Hum Sahaja. And you don't have to have any meaning with it, whatever. It's just something to mutter away while you're expanding into the richness of this experience. Om Samantabhadra Sammakaya Sarvadharma Mahameta Vajrabhumi Dhammadhatu Hum Sahaja. This is this mantra. But the mantra is actually filled with meaning should you wish to contemplate more detail. And so my suggestion is that that's the mantra. It's a bit confusing in the way it's been presented here for some people, because it looks like there's maybe 6 mantras. Okay? But the mantra is Om Samantabhadra Sammakaya Sarvadharma Mahameta Vajrabhumi Dhammadhatu Hum Sahaja. Right? Now you may find that sometimes you're emphasizing one aspect of it, and so maybe you're emphasizing the Sammakaya one, right? So you can go Om Samantabhadra Sammakaya Hum, and just work with that one, right? Focusing on that. Or maybe you're focusing on the Mahameta, Om Samantabhadra Mahameta Hum. And it's a little bit like Om Samantabhadra, and then the next bit is the characteristics of Samantabhadra. Right? Hum. So you're actually meditating on the characteristics of Samantabhadra. But there are many characteristics, and actually all characteristics, if you know what I mean. Like there's many in the sense of there's this, and there's this, and there's this, and there's also the characteristic of all of this and this and this together. Right? So that's the single expression of the mantra. So I'd like to go to the text now. Blending the samadhi of innate naturalness and with the mystery of speech. Okay, so you imagine you're just there in a sense of the visualization that I just constructed for you is not innate naturalness. Right? That's a construct. That's a skillful fabrication. Right? But it's a reflection of, and possibly a reminder of, innate naturalness. And if we come back, just backtrack a little bit to where we were, just to remind ourselves of where we actually are at the beginning of mantra yoga, right? This unending display embodying knower and known, apprehender and apprehender, an ever-fresh communion of transient parts. I looked at that and when I read it coming off the printing press, I thought, oh, I made a typo, or somehow transient got repeated, right? But then I recalled, no, I actually gave some real thought about this and decided to say transient parts, right? Because there's a tendency to say transient parts, but the parts themselves are eternal. That's the construction we have. The universe is made of atoms. Yeah, they come together and move apart, but the atoms exist, right? But what's this a reminder to myself that even the parts that I'm seeing are transient are themselves made up of transient parts. So this was actually intentional. Then afterwards I had doubt, right? Because I'd forgotten what my mindset was when I did that. And then I saw it again. All is stripped bare, revealed in the translucent gaze of love and wonderment. Look deeply into each and every manifestation of your current arising experience. The true nature of phenomena is a dancing of ever-present translucent awareness. A translation of that in Tibetan, by the way, is Rigpa, which is ultimately indescribable, inconceivable, and inexpressible. Cultivate the subtle art of resting at ease in this unconfused state of complete authenticity and presence. Yeah.
I have to ask about the word inconceivable.
Ask.
I'm asking because I understand I have a sense of indescribable and inexpressible.
Yeah.
But inconceivable...
It's inconceivable. It's inconceivable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Inconceivable is inconceivable. You've just used it.
I have. Yes.
And you not only that, but you're responding to me using it, and you felt you had a sense of what I meant. It wasn't just what I'm trying to say is it didn't go, a dancing of ever-fresh, translucentizing awareness, which is ultimately indescribable and inexpressible. It wasn't like that. It was, you actually heard a word which had meaning for you, but the reason why you're asking me is because the meaning you thought of seems out of context with this. It doesn't make sense in the flow of the thing. That's exactly what I meant. It's inconceivable. There's whole aspects of life from a certain position which is just beyond, like, to conceive of something is to function in a particular way, right, that brings forward that something. But if you say, well, actually that tanka I described goes on infinitely, that's kind of inconceivable. I mean, in a very general sense it is, but in the detail, could you actually visualize a tanka of where each part, in the heart of each part is a Samantabhadra, and in the heart of each Samantabhadra is a totality of a universe, where in the heart of each, it's like, what on earth's that? You get a vague idea, it's saying vastness and all-inclusiveness and so on, right? But the detail, it's inconceivable. You can't conceptualize it, right? Beyond saying it's inconceivable. That's all it's saying. It's acknowledging that. We don't like to live, we in our culture feel uncomfortable dealing with inconceivable. And so we eliminate it. And so the whole world is made of what is conceivable. Right? Now, it's inconceivable to me that we could ever have a system in which there wasn't just a Democrat and a Republican Party. It's inconceivable to me that we could ever have this tragedy that took place in Christchurch. Right? It is kind of conceivable, but especially now it's happened. But before that, this is that kind of stuff happened in other countries, not in New Zealand. It's kind of inconceivable to me that the earth shakes until I came to New Zealand and was in my first earthquake. And it's like, I never conceived of it. There's a lot that is Samantabhadra that you haven't conceived of yet. And by saying that, it keeps the door open to the mystery. And so it's actually like it's infinitely inconceivable. It's eternally inconceivable in its fullness. Right? Doesn't mean you can't get useful angles on it. Right? And that's what it's trying to get at. Yeah. So blending the samadhi of innate naturalness. So this is this innate naturalness. In a sense, the naturalness of this interbeingness was not contrived by me. It's innate. It arose with the birthing of me, the birthing of conception, the birthing of animal life, the birthing of living systems, the birthing of the planet, the birthing of the universe. Whatever you choose to say the birth is, right? This processing was already there in place, right? This is when we talk about it as being primordial. It's like eternally fresh, primordial, right? So blending the samadhi of innate naturalness now with the mystery of speech, contemplatively explore the following themes. This is just a way of speaking in a very kind of pragmatic way. Another way of, is saying contemplatively contemplate some of the really major ways that we attempt to comprehend a mystery such as Samantabhadra, right? So we attempt to comprehend it through form. We attempt to comprehend it through phenomena and dharmas, right? We attempt to comprehend it through the quality of the emotion, and putting it really grossly, it's like a sense of like universal love for all beings, with all beings, a kind of a really deep quality of this. It's kind of the unshakable ground of being. It's right, and so on. So just giving a small kind of glimpse at ways of approaching the detail that's our attention is being drawn to. Om is a sound, right? And it's not really translatable at all, but it is used in a context of invoking a beyond words sense of totality, total integration, the wholeness, that which isness, right? Or in using a language that the Mahayana tradition is comfortable with, in a sense, the naturally occurring Dharmakaya that I put in living Dharmakaya, right? Because I think there's still a tendency to abstract the idea of Dharmakaya as if it's so kind of big that it's beyond life. Life arises in the Dharmakaya, but actually the Dharmakaya is an expression of this living process. The Dharmakaya never existed until someone invented it. Well, chose to name it. You know what I mean? And it's just a word, right? But even the ability to conceive of the interbeingness of everything, the total, kaya means body. And we have body like a collection, right? Like a body of knowledge, right? It's like a collection of knowledge, right? It's talking about a collection of many contributing aspects or parts or what have you. That's what we mean by body. We don't mean by body a lump, right? For that we might talk about rupa, right? I'm just stretching it, but I'm saying that kaya itself actually refers to more the dancing processes that give rise to a shimmering realm of constantly transforming mystery that we call a pillow, a wooden frog, a tarchin, a tree. Right? This is there. And we say, well, that's the body of Tarchin, the body of the frog, and so on. Right? And so the Dharmakaya, right? It's a living process, and it's actually superfluous to say this, right? But I think it's skillful to say it, right? It's superfluous to say it because ultimately you might find yourself asking the question, is there anything that's not part of the living process? Because mountains and rocks only emerge in the fluid dancing of living process of a perceiver. Like if I go to, Pusscat and say, Pusscat, get off that rock, right? There's no rock there, she just jumps on, the table is a table for me, but I don't know if the table is a table for the cat. The table is a platform, the table is a source of shade, the table is a place for mice to run away from and then tangle up in the legs. But it's not a table. The table arises in someone who, in an attempt to explain the weird perceptions, like if you look at any object right now and then just move to one side and see how actually you see the object a little bit differently. And so by exercising your volitional movement of your body, you experience many different shapes of this form. And somehow we have this kind of belief, God knows how it's there, and we could spend a long time trying to speculate or hypothesize why it's there, but we have a sense that there is an invariant true form of this, right? But we never experience it. We get this, and we get this, and we get this, and our organism is kind of holding kinetic memories of the movements that are required to see this from this angle and that angle, and all of that together is called Andy. All that together is called this or that or the other. Okay? You have a sense of this kind of, and that ability to create invariables, right? In the sense apparent invariables, like an object. Like I see Paul, I haven't seen him for a long time, and I see Paul and I go, hi Paul, and the object that I'm saying hi Paul to turns around and says hi back, which confirms my sense that this must be a Paul. You're with me here, and yet, after not seeing a person for a long time, they've changed. They get a little fatter, a little thinner, a little hairier, a little less hairy, taller, shorter. I mean, you know what I mean? And yet we still say, oh, no, that's still Paul. Paul is an invariant. That's what I mean. It's like there's this kind of concept of a thing. We know what Dharma is. We know what this is. But in actual fact, if we look carefully at our experience instead of this kind of accepted concept, right? We see that when I look at it this way, it's this way. And it's very useful to be able to see a whole lot of different things and call them the same thing. It's like if that person that I described, that Damasio was describing, who had no functional short-term memory, and so or very little, and so he would get into a conversation. Oh, hello, nice to meet you. Who are you? Oh, I'm Antonio, and then Damasio goes out of the room, comes back in, 30 seconds later. Oh, hello, who are you? Nice to meet you. It's like no recall that this different, because this is a different shape, so therefore it's a different person, right? I mean, if we had acute awareness, we'd be completely dysfunctional in the terms of what we call functionality. Maybe there'd be some other function, but it wouldn't work, right? We have somehow, amazingly, consciousness has been able to create this illusion, if you like, or this belief in invariance, in static, durable qualities. The trouble is that we lose sight of how that's produced, and then we start to believe that they work, and then we try to explain the universe in terms of interactions of static qualities, and we have problems doing that because there's always contradictions and yes but, and it doesn't quite work. And the reason why it doesn't work is because there aren't any static qualities. And our whole basis of this is samsara. Samsara is not, messed up government and bad kind of social policy and this and that and the other, right? That's and somehow if you had a clear government and better social policy, you wouldn't have samsara. No, because you say, oh yeah, now we got the lumps working together perfectly, right? Still samsara. Not seeing what's going on because somewhere along the line it's not going to gel. We're not actually working with reality. Right? And so, if you say, well, we want to get rid of this illusion, you're just an illusion, you don't exist, you're just kind of dancing transiency and so on. That doesn't really work. That's not very helpful. And so, this is how I can talk about translucentizing, to be able to see a kind of appearance of form and to work with it, knowing that it's not an illusion, it's a construct, and this is how we work. Right? At the beginning, when you look at it, you go, whoa, it's hard to grasp, but don't worry, you've been doing it all your life. You just didn't know you were doing it. So I like to, this experience that I'm talking about, the ability to be able to relate to an object and see many different expressions and yet call it the same object. That is the result of a living system in action. It's consciousness. It's perception. It's right. This is where. So I'm just the naturally occurring living Dharmakaya. It's not just kind of a totality that's floating around there, which you're trying to comprehend. Right? This is what we are. So that's Om. Inconceivable. Beyond words, don't worry about it, just go Om. Samantabhadra. And this is where I would like to have, maybe we could have a 3-week retreat just on this next paragraph. Right? Then it still wouldn't be enough, right? So all we can do is, this is a certain angle. It's trying to, we haven't really talked about Samantabhadra except on the cover page. We didn't really talk about it in the introduction, and in the skillful fabrication, all we said was a kind of an integrated dyad of unfathomable blue and white. It's pretty vague, as to what we haven't really got this Samantabhadra yet. The whole sadhana, the whole process of praxis of this is to gradually bring to elucidate our understanding of Samantabhadra. And it continues to elucidate until we get to the end. So even here it's not going to fully elucidate it, but it's getting more detailed now because we're in mantra, we're in words. And in words, shared language and so forth, we bring forth increasing details of things and parts, right? I mean, the number of things and parts that all of us are comfortable with handling today is just would be inconceivable to beings 100, 200 years ago, right? Because we lots of us can talk about molecules and cell function and atoms and we can talk about internets and we can talk about social networks and instant communication at distances and hard drives and memory sticks and cell phones and apps, and none of these things existed, right? I would put it to you that we live in a much more complicated universe than the ancients, right? Because we bring it forth through our languaging together, right? That we communally, in a sense, entrain each other to kind of recognize certain dancing dharmas to be a this or a that, or a bite of information, or all kinds of amazing things, right? So in the sense we are, and this is done through language, not through languaging, but languaging is part of it. Could you imagine physics unfolding to the degree of understanding that we have today, or biology unfolding to the degree of understanding that we have today, without human beings talking to each other? Right? Our explosion of knowledge, so to speak, is completely a communal activity. Right? It's like entire universes of individuals interacting with other universes of individuals in a creative way, and we bring forth this thing which is beyond any one person's capacity to bring forth. Yeah? So language, I'm saying, is like really important. It's in there. So Samantabhadra, right? The totally positive with nothing to refute. Right? These are just kind of generalizations that we got off the cover page. Is the timeless state of all-inclusive perfect union. Right? So you got a kind of we still don't know anything about the detail, but it's a kind of a general sense, right? Totally positive in the way I've been speaking about on and off through the retreat. That in a sense it's engaged with what is happening, not with what is not happening. It's interested in what's happening, not in what's not happening, right? It's the positive in the sense of the proactive, like happening, creative. Imagine for a moment a really creative person spending their time in deep depression over all the things they don't create. You know what I mean? You could paint an infinity of different kinds of paintings, and imagine but the ones that you do paint are beautiful and inspiring and fabulous and sell for massive amounts of money. But meanwhile, you're totally depressed, right? Because it sort of comes to your mind all the inconceivable other paintings that you don't paint, because while you're painting this one, you can't be painting that one, right? That's to be upset about what you don't do. Now, this sounds absolutely silly, but I think if you think about it, tragically, we spend a lot of time, we humans, worrying about and concerned about what we don't do, and not actually investigating and diving into what we do and expanding it. And the living that I am didn't emerge out of the living I didn't do. The living that I am emerges out of the living that I do, right? And, that you do for me, we do together. I'm not eyeing, in a sense. I think you're following me. Okay? So we got this kind of, and nothing to refute. It's like, what's to refute? Because the act of refuting something is a new positive doing that's happening. Me in the state of pushing that away, right? You just like Samantabhadra accepts and engages and moves with. It's a state. He doesn't, she doesn't move with this. It is the fact that the universe moves with the moving that it is, and it doesn't move with the moving that it isn't. It's kind of so obvious in a way, but I think this is really useful to contemplate in a deep way and see how there are areas where it actually applies to my life. And I think you'll find that in the areas where it applies to your life, that's an area of unresolvedness, messiness, right? It's a timeless state, right? It's kind of out of time. It's primordial. It's always this, right? Of all-inclusive perfect union. And that's vague because it's like union of wisdom and compassion, self and other, knower and known, inner and outer. Any dyad you want to identify, it's a union of that. So it covers all. Okay? Now, in the Tibetan Tantra traditions, Samantabhadra, when portrayed, is portrayed as a Yabyum figure. Right? At the time of Avatamsaka, when Samantabhadra was portrayed, it was usually portrayed as a single Buddha figure that was just deep blue. Right? So there's no which one is the real Samantabhadra. They're all the real. So it just depends on how you want to emphasize this. Think of it as a kind of a teaching. Right? Samantabhadra in deep blue aspect represents the expanse of spacious, open, fundamentally ungraspable conversation. Braidings of languaging and emotioning, weaving in and through each other in the process of bringing forth the worlds that we share together. Right? Where are we? Oh, we're in the Buddha Grove at Orgyen Hermitage. This is a world that we share together. Right? We don't share it with the crickets or the cicadas. Right? Because if I saw a cicada up at the house and I said, hey, I'll meet you down at the Buddha Grove, I doubt if they'd come here. Because for them, this is not a Buddha Grove. Right? This is a shared thing. And if it was a stranger, who the guy from Caddy Timber comes along to deliver something and he's looking for us, and Mary says, oh, they're all down at the Buddha Grove. And he wouldn't know what it is, right? Because he's not part of this language group, right? And literally language groups live in worlds which are different than other language groups live in. Huh? You see this? Right? And the difficulty, of course, comes when you think that the world that your language group lives in is the only world. Or you realize, well, there are other worlds, but they're kind of threatening and antagonistic, and, to be safe in my world, I need to wipe out their worlds. And yet the whole thing is like, none of that's happening. Actually, another way of saying this, there's just trees and earth and metabolizing bipedal primates, right? Kind of arranged, and we call this a Dharma class. There is no Dharma class, right? I mean, we could say truthfully, there's no Dharma class. There's just kind of beating hearts. And could you imagine, like strip it all down, right? And like each person, like, can you see it like? You're breathing in my breath, I'm breathing in your breath, my heart's flowing around, your heart's flowing around, bits of spit are flying out into the universe, right? They're going in, being sucked into your body and becoming part of your blood. Part of your juices are coming in, and we're all exchanging substances. So there's no Dharma class, right? But then, of course, if we look into that, we see that doesn't exist outside of the community of beings that language that into being. Right? Because actually it could be described totally differently, and the decaying leaf is actually experiencing it in a different way, in inconceivable ways, because all I can do is describe how a leaf might experience in terms of my experience of experiencing. Inconceivable, the legitimacy of another. And yet, I can conceive that it's important for me to conceive of an inconceivable legitimacy of another, because the world's very different, right? When I can't conceive of it, when there is no legitimacy of another, there's just this other. I see what they are, and I don't like them, or I do like them, or whatever. I'm going to plow on, because you see, in order to really this section here has arisen out of years of exploration of Damasio's work and Edelman's work and Maturana's work, and now I'm seeing how it's totally congruent with Sheets Johnson's work, and it's like to go into the kind of biological. It's complex. People devote their life to this, and we're just hinting at this. Okay? So it's not an attempt to explain, but an attempt to link one's understanding as they are. Right? Samantabhadra, who's portrayed as the kind of the name that goes with the white figure, right? In pure white aspect, represents physiological autopoietic functioning. Right? The biological roots of clear, unmistakable discernment, like the way a cell is structured includes the structure of the membrane, right? The structure of the cell and the membrane, right, is congruent with the total functioning that's bringing forth the cell and membrane, right? The membrane itself is an awesomely complex, dynamic process, right, which will respond to some kinds of chemistry and some kinds of situations, but not others. Right? So you could actually see, in a sense, like the cell can discriminate. Some cells can discriminate gradients of sugar or glucose, and move towards them because it's nutriment. Some cells can discriminate, like when this kind of chemical goes along, it goes, and a whole kind of pile of process happens inside the cell. But that same chemical goes by a different cell with a different structured membrane, that one doesn't respond. Why doesn't it respond? Because it doesn't like it. Or it doesn't respond because it's not interested in it. No, it doesn't respond because the functioning of the physical beingness of it isn't built to respond to that. Right? And so we see that the act of perception, right, discernment, is actually built into the very functioning of nature. It's not like you have a functioning nature and then it might have discernment or not, right? The type of discernments that you're capable of is completely congruent with the physiological functioning that you are. We all know this. You sort of wake up in the morning with a splitting headache and a hangover or something. I'm sure everyone's had that experience somewhere in the course of their life and living, right? And you know that your perception and your functioning with the world is different, right, than when you're feeling really kind of good and balanced and fresh and so on, right? That your perception of the world is different when the physiology of your being is such that your eyelids are down instead of up. Right? You crash into things with your eyelids down, and you don't when they're up. How amazing. Right? And yet we have this sense, we're hinting at here, this kind of the roots of discernment are right there in the biological functioning. And if you're interested in pursuing this, like introductory book of the Tree of Knowledge, and then a kind of more enriched understanding of that in Maturana's Origin of Humanness in the Biology of Love. Good stuff. Right? So these are kind of weavings of co-emergent realms, interpenetrating realms, and multi-domained, multi-leveled symbioses. So there's molecules dancing with and knowing molecules in the process of bringing forth something that an observer calls a cell. There are cells dancing with other cells, right, in the process of bringing forth what an observer calls organs and tissues and so on and so forth. You've got the dancings of all of those, right, kind of cognizances chemical cognizances, physical cognizances, all kinds of different cognizances, bringing forth, right, what an observer calls an integrated multi-celled organism, right? And then we have integrated multi-celled organisms structurally coupling and languaging with other integrated multi-celled organisms, and we say we're speaking. Right? In a sense, everything that we do is like there's a foundation of our being in this kind of inconceivable generative process that's generating our arising. And then there is our communal exploration and languaging, which conceives of this generative process in a certain way depending on our culture, like scientific way for scientists, or kind of religious-y way for religious types, or you know what I mean, or it's magic for magicians, right? Your culture has this kind of belief system, right? And so we have our way of explaining the universe, and yet the universe that we explain is completely empty. You grasp at it and it slips through your fingers, because all that there is the generative process. But the generative process we can only explain in terms of the things which we name, right? And we, in a sense, are able to name the thing communally, right? Now it's inconceivable, then. It's truly inconceivable, right? And it's ungraspable. Now, in the Tibetan tradition, they didn't have this kind of detail to be able to see how discernment, or to construct a universe, in a sense, in which discernment arises out of biological functioning. They constructed a universe in a different fashion. And it worked for a period of time. And what I mean by that is it worked until the Tibetan culture disintegrated. Right? It's sort of in process of, as it becomes, in a sense, invaded, first of all, right? And then diluted, and, the younger generation Tibetans, they might be interested in Dharma, but they have cell phones and they've got social network things, and, it's changing. It's changing. It won't be recognizable, right? The life of Kala Rinpoche, who, I felt fortunate to have been able to study with, right, was one of the, and just to have contact with someone who actually lived most of his life, up until when he was, I'm not sure how old he was, maybe 70 or something before he left Tibet, right, in a completely traditional Tibetan kind of training culture and so on, and then he came out and he saw airplanes, He went to His Holiness Karmapa, and Karmapa said, "Oh, you've got to come out of retreat now." Okay, because he was very, devoted to His Holiness. And I want you to travel around to various Western countries and establish meditation centers. This guy spent his whole life, like decades, sitting in a cave or in a room just meditating. Okay, you got no idea of microscopes or cell phones or airplanes or anything. So, okay. So someone, you come up these steps and get on the plane. He gets on the plane, looks out the window, and right. There's this wonderful story of him in Rome, right? He was hosted in Rome, and he was supposed to be giving a talk at a certain time, and the people who normally would have picked him up from his hotel and brought him to the talk arrived at the talk because they'd been told somebody else had picked him up. And they were all at the talk. They were, "Well, did you pick him up? No. Did you pick him up? No. Where is he?" And then they went to the hotel and he wasn't there. And they realized they'd lost Kala Rinpoche, right? He doesn't speak any language other than Tibetan. He said to us through a translator, he said, "Look, if you really want to study with me, you have to learn Tibetan because I'm too old to learn English." And so here he is. He's in Rome, right? And this is first time in the West, cars whipping by and so on, right? And so what are we going to do? There was nothing they could do, right? Except just drive around the streets looking for him because they figured they'd recognize him. Because there weren't many, not too many guys walking around with all these Tibetan Lama robes on. And so eventually they found him, right? And he was outside a construction site where they had big fencing, like with plywood fencing. You know how they do it in the city sometimes, and they wall it off while they're digging the foundations and doing things. And there were little windows cut in the wall so people could stop and have a look. And he was just sitting, oh money baby, oh money baby, oh money baby, watching these huge earth movers like moving stuff around. He's just like, so interesting, like just exploring. And they said, oh, Venerable One, please come. Oh, okay. And comes off, sits down, gives a brilliant Dharma class, right? Moves on. In the course of 3 visits to the West, he establishes over about 120 different meditation centers, many of which are going today, still. And then it's like, oh well, go back to his little monastery just just outside of Darjeeling, not go anywhere. Okay. It's a different view, right? And to be able to see that, right? But we come through and we bring forth a world of objects, but those objects are actually assumptions that these living processes are these objects, and an assumption that when an object is what it is, it's got nothing to do with something else. You know, it's like, this is beginning to loosen. And so we have a sense of like the emptiness is arising, oddly enough, out of the languaging. That's why I've changed it around. Like in the Tibetan tradition, usually the white figure is said to represent emptiness, right? And the blue figure represents skillful means. And I've kind of changed it around and inside and out because I don't think it matters. That was there. It's like a union of the dyads that you see constructing the universe, right? And when you look at it this way, in a sense, the deep blue for me has a feeling of like I can't see. You know, like you're out in deep blue. It's kind of, you're not this. It's kind of spacious. It's kind of vast. Right? For me, it resonates that more. Like for whiteness seems much more discernment. It's like I shine the torch on it, you know, and see it with the light of seeing, right? And then these 2 facets, if you like, it's like beginning to realize that we create form. We bring forth a sense of durable, invariant forms through our communal languaging and living, right? And all of this is actually a reflection of an inconceivable generative process, the processes that are generating this experience, right? And we begin to look at that, and we see that that generative process, if you like, is also kind of empty in the sense that it's inconceivable. The whole thing is inconceivable. And yet this Samantabhadra, the total field of our experience, is this kind of union, if you like, of the particular lived experience that I have, which is contributing to the universe that I experience, because the way I function, right, determines how I respond, right? And so we have these 2. Right? Together, Samantabhadra, Samantabhadri comprise a unity that is continuously manifesting in and as this constantly evolving, presently appearing universe. Okay? And so, you know, I might be going, Om Samantabhadra Samagaya Savanama Mahamedhamajra. Meanwhile, that's just kind of burble to keep my mind off wandering to other things. I'm speaking really grossly, right? While at the same time I'm having a sense of appreciating how this moment, like being interested in seeing this moment through the lens of a union of these 2 kind of dynamics of being, the observer, which can describe and name, and we communally observe and we individually observe, and that which is observed, which is the generative process, right, which is giving rise to this. When I'm one of the aspects that I'm deeply appreciating in this retreat is that while, because we're having these classes, right, it's really fueling this commentary that I'm sort of writing, right? Because, you know, when I'm by myself, I do other things. Right? It sort of comes out of the living experience, right? Trying to put into words. And so I have to just stay tuned for the commentary. There's a lot more there. Right? I'd like to risk more confusion, but possibly not. Maybe it'll elucidate a bit more of something that I wrote yesterday. Oddly enough, not odd in my mind, and that's too glib, but after sitting in the morning with the shock of you know, what has been happening in Christchurch and a kind of recognition of this reflection to the world, I sat with that, but I also engaged in my expression of responsiveness, right? And which is to try to clarify and understand and put it into a larger context. And so I wrote this, which doesn't seem to have anything to do whatsoever with what happened in Christchurch, right? Not separate from the primal ground of being, becoming, right? And that's like the Dharma Dhatu, the total field of all events and meanings. Not separate from the Dharma Dhatu, two possible paths of awakening appear or emerge, right? So it's not like, if I say emerge from, then they've become separate, right? But it's not separate from this total field of all events and meanings, but our discernment, in a sense, makes them appear to emerge, right? One is the path of awakening based on seeing dualistically, self and other. And two is the path of awakening based on seeing the totally integrated, interbeing, interknowing process nature of everything and everyone. That's the generative process. In this description, there's no ignorance versus seeing, no marigpa versus rigpa. Right? Those are kind of classical Tibetan terms here, right? Kind of ignorance and seeing. There is only and always seeing, understanding, interresponsive functioning. Seeing, understanding, interresponsive functioning. Inherent in evolving living systems. Right? In terms of the activity of living, the weavings of movement that altogether we call living, right? I just want to mean, you know, in terms of the activity of living, by that I mean the weavings of movement that altogether we call living, right? In these terms, it's not possible to have a path of absence, of not doing something. The living world of evolving autopoiesis is a manifesting of interknowing involving structural coupling and languaging in myriad domains and dimensions, from molecules to cells to organs to organisms, societies, and living worlds. Through this complexifying of relationships emerges what we as observers would call a proto-self, or a core self, and an autobiographic self. This is borrowing on terms from Antonio Damasio's work. Proto-self, or proto-knowing, proto-consciousness, is demonstrated through the multi-leveled integration of corporeal, homeostatic, chemical processes, autoimmune functionings, and basic perceptual, skeletal, muscular organ functioning knowing, right? It's like the critter moving as an integrated whole whilst at the same time maintaining its temperature as it needs to be, or its balance of chemistry. And this is a kind of consciousness, but it's quite different from human language consciousness. But there's that sense of self, and that proto-self you can sometimes actually meet with reasonably directly, right? When you, on waking up, right? Like sometimes under certain conditions, you can experience waking up and you have no idea where you are. You have no idea who you are. You have no idea what you are, but you know you are. Right? And in that state, you're capable of doing things like you can reach out and turn the light on, or you can breathe, and you can do this. This is like what it, and it, you're not actually, it's not you in the bed reach out and turn the light on. You roll over on the bed not being you, and you turn on the light not being you. That your actions are completely based on this, but there's no one knowing this. So this is kind of a proto-consciousness, right? It's the beginning. There's more proto than proto, but we're talking about now in the realm of the human experience, an integrated multi-celled organism. More proto than the proto would be, cell life, expressing, like discernment and so on, working in its environment. We could go right back to molecules, dancing with each other in integrative, orderly fashion to give rise to cells. But we'll start with us, right? Now, proto-self or proto-knowing consciousness, excuse me, I think I just lost my line. So through this complexifying of relationships emerges the proto-self, the core self, and the autobiographic self. And we just described roughly what Damasio was hinting at. I'm starting to elaborate this out into ways he didn't speak about. Proto-self or proto-knowing is demonstrated through the multi-leveled integration of bodily, corporeal, homeostatic chemical processes, autoimmune functionings, and basic perceptual, skeletal, muscular, vestibular, balancing, organ functioning knowing. Right? Now, core self-knowing consciousness is an expansion of the proto-self functioning, with the proto-self knowing weaving together with experimental volitional behaviors and interactions with others, and our organismic response to these actions, which then sets up more volitional activity. It's me in relationship with you. This guy with his short-term memory had a perfectly functioning core self. Hi, how are you? Who are you? 2 minutes later, hi, who are you? Right? Like in the immediacy of the functioning, there was a sense of someone, right, who was having an identity and recognizing this other clustering of activities as someone who has an identity and entering into relationship with them, right? And so it's kind of a core consciousness, but you may not have much of an autobiographic consciousness. Right? Now, this core consciousness, this continuous process, is the basis of a dawning sense of agency, right? Like, I can do, and with that is recognizing that you who are not I can do, you can do. I can do and you can do, right? There's a sense like this. Autobiographic self-knowing appears with the development of spoken language and more complex social stratification, and the capacity to communicate abstract understandings to others, and to store this knowledge in dispositions that are characterized with stories, an increasingly solid sense of history and time supporting a growing sense of autobiographic self evolving across a panorama of time. Right? It's kind of, this is where I live. The class begins here and it ends there, and right, tomorrow we're going to have a deepening day, and yesterday we had the experience that we did, and right, we're kind of this whole sense of a world which is not there in that person whose core self is functional, but the autobiographic self hasn't yet started to function. And that is very much a social thing that we bring into being through languaging together. As Maturana talked about languaging as being consensual coordinations of behavior. Right? As we learn to kind of, I coordinate, right? There's a coordination of all the activities in my being, which is coordinating with all the activities in your being, as I see your activities not as activities, but as behavior. And as you see my activities not as activities, but as behavior, because behavior arises in an observer, right? Like, oh, he did that to that. In the doing, it was just the doing. It's a bit like, rivers don't flow. Right? Rivers only flow for observers. Right? Rivers don't even flow for observers who are in the river. If you jump in the river and close your eyes and it's not a turbulent river, you have no idea you're floating down the river. You're absolutely at rest in relationship to the water molecules around you. Right? It arises in the observer. Right? So we say behavior is an animal responding to, in a kind of logical fashion or whatever, a definable fashion, to changes in the environment, either within or without. And you say, oh, this is your behavior. But actually that way of describing what's going on only arises in an observer. If you were just in samadhi in that, you wouldn't say I'm drinking water or anything. There's just like, you're raising the cup to have a drink. And you're doing it like with such intimacy of like whole universe is here. It's always been here, and it's here, it's here, it's here. It's like this and that. And a friend had a stroke, and I went to visit her and spend some time with her in the hospital. It was a long time ago, and it was a catastrophic stroke, and to the degree where she showed no visual recognition of her children. She had no functioning, she was back at infant stage, like completely, body functions all gone and everything, just, and they thought, oh, she's become a vegetable, they said. She was sort of slowly coming out of this state, and gradually bits of her were integrating back, and we learned a way of communicating, right? And one day we were sitting there and she sort of points at this. She said, can you see that thing up there? And I said, yeah, looking at a clock. It was a big clock. She said, people think that's important. Her voice went really peculiar, She said, and one day she was telling me that every day they would roll her over on one side and pull the sheets out flat, and then they'd roll her onto where the sheets are pulled out flat, and then pull the sheets out flat on the other side. And one day she decided to jump out of the bed and do it herself. So she did. She jumped out of bed and she did that. And then the nurse came in and said, oh, you made your bed. And she said, and then I learned I made my bed. It was quite incredible, actually, to have this interaction with her, because when I was phoned, it was a very inspiring kind of difficult state, right? When the family called me, they did it out of sheer desperation because she couldn't recognize anyone, and so someone got the idea they'd go through her address book and just read names and watch her face very carefully. And she didn't make any twitch, nothing, except for two names. One was mine and the other one was Wonchuk, who some of you knew Wonchuk. And Wonchuk was in Canada, so she wasn't available, and she was this person was down in Christchurch. I was up in Auckland, so I flew down. And they warned me. They said, look, don't be upset. She probably won't recognize you. There'll be nothing, but we thought we'd just try it. And so I walked into the room, and it was a very dismaying moment for her kids, because who accompanied me. I walked into the room, she sat straight up in bed and said, "Tarchin," and threw her arms open. Right? And she'd forgotten everything except the pith instructions of Mahamudra. Right? That was for me, that was just really amazing to see. Right? She was just totally there in the present, with kind of a flow of interest and engagement, and cutting through all the concepts and everything. It's like, she'd been working at it for a long time. She was already beginning to give Dharma classes in Christchurch at the time. You studied with her, didn't you, at the beginning? Yeah. But this sense of, it was such a innocent thing to say, like, I sort of just copied. She said, she said to me, people just copy. She said, people just copy. She said, I just copied what they did. And then the nurse said, oh, you made your bed. And then I found out I made my bed. And, as a child, we just copy, and then gradually you copy grunting and flapping your lips in certain ways and sounds and so on, and speech starts to come out. And then we forget that we've just been copying what somebody else said or what I did. Yes, I copy myself according to what I remember myself doing yesterday, right? And we forget that we're just copying, and we think that actually the universe that we see is the universe that is inherently independently there. And yet the act of perception is not separate from the activity of engagement. The activity of engagement, you don't engage and then you perceive. That type of engaging an observer calls perception. Our current human culture is very much a manifesting of an evolving path or process characterized by self and other distinction making in ways that emphasize competition, ownership, and control. However, the other path of seeing the interbeing, interknowing nature of living systems with its concurrent cooperation is still available, since the dynamic we call seeing emerged from the basic functioning of the Dharma Dhatu. Right? Perhaps these two ways of seeing that I'm describing would correspond to Maturana's terms matristic and patristic, right? Like a sense of like an inclusive, inviting, allowing quality of seeing, and a discerning, functional, right? And it's like the sense that maybe it seems that for evolution to continue, we need to continue with these themes, right? We, as volitional beings, will need to learn the art of harmonizing these two talents. The talent for seeing in terms of wholeness, and in the sense of a wholeness of generative process which is ungraspable, and a talent for seeing in terms of communally created forms and structures, right, that we increasingly believe in, right, and yet emerges out of the same thing. And the union of these two, it's a little bit like, I just added a tiny little bit this morning, because I wrote this yesterday, but what I have described here is not an attempt to outline how our sense of self first came into being. Right? I'm not trying to describe that. It is a description made by a creature that already finds itself manifesting all three aspects of self-knowing. Right? It's not possible for me to have any sense of how it came into being, because I can only work with what I am, and I'm already all three. right? And so this is it. I become this and I expand into the wider living of the world, right? Allows me to kind of look into my experience in order to come up with an explanation that will help me make sense of such experiences. And so I say, well, I'm having this experience because I chose to look, and I chose to look because of the process of the way my immune system was going with this and that happened because of this. And gradually, as I expand into a wider, say the wider life of the planet, but maybe what I need to do is expand the wider life of the planet, not even say into. Because the planet me, I mean self and other is ultimately the planet, right? Is expanding in this understanding as I make sense of it. How can we make sense of what took place in Christchurch? How can we make sense of how we can move with such a situation? And this is a possible avenue for making sense of this and seeing the angle where I can actually do that nudge and where I can't, and what is kind of fruitless and what is potentially fruitful. Right? You don't know for sure it'll be fruitful, but you can be fairly confident that certain things are fruitless. Right? Like, I mean, in a sense, like to pass laws that make it that what we could do is have mass surveillance, right? And we could force people to do this, and we could force people to do that. So we have nothing like in the past we used to talk about free speech and no free speech, right? No communication and so on. We're doing all of this for safety, right? And in the process of that, I'm sure we would bring forth like an authoritarian control freak culture that eventually would fail. I cannot see how it could possibly be sustainable, right? Because it's completely incestuous on the part of human beings. It's as if somehow it doesn't take into account that we're not the only game players on this planet, and that whales are doing stuff, and dolphins, and microorganisms, and bacteria, and so on. And so, in a sense, that vision, it looks like a good enough vision and a way of solving this, but in this larger vision, you recognize, no, this is not really a possible avenue to go. Now, you know, I don't see how just becoming a little bit more loving and tolerant is going to really solve the whole thing, but it does seem like it's a step in the right direction. You know what I mean? Like, it's not it's a possibility. Celebrate the possibilities and nudge them, and begin to let go of the things that, you know, you got to do something. You know, we can't just sit here. I mean, you know, it's a crisis that's going on. We got to respond. Well, let's bomb someone. You know, we've got a problem with drugs. What are we going to do about it? Well, we could have more counseling, and we could look into the reason why people are so unhappy that they're looking for kind of fixes and to feel good, and we can adjust that, change our whole society. Oh, it's so complex. We can't do that. Well, I know. Let's have a war on drugs. Oh, yeah, we can do that. Right? And so you might begin to realize that just because it's simple and easy to define doesn't necessarily mean that that's a fruitful avenue to explore. And just because it's not easy to pin down in all its detail and it's impossible to predict how it's going to unfold doesn't mean that it's not a possible avenue forward. Right? In faith and trust and wonderment. So we just got the first word. Om Samantabhadra. Right? So now I'm going to go really fast because I do want to just touch this. Samakaya. Sama is complete. So it's invoking a sense of Samantabhadra as a dancing of all the collectives that give rise to the universe that I can conceive of. You don't have to worry about the universe you can't conceive of, right? So you might be, you know, Om Samantabhadra Sammakaya Hom, right? And you might be working with that for a number of years as you contemplate Damasio's work and Edelman's work and Maturana's work and cell biology and unfolding, because you're looking at how different bodies relate and so on and produce the knowings we call embodiment. Right? Sarva Dharma. Sarva means all. Right? Samma is like the summation, the total, all of them that way. Sarva is like numerically all of them, right? All dharmas, all phenomena, right? That somehow there's room in my approach to the universe for all phenomena, right? This is, in other words, it's not, well, I'll ignore, it's too difficult to deal with this phenomena in my universe, so we'll deal with it this way. So you become a scientist. You set up a totally hypothetical experiment inside a box under totally controlled situations, right? Because it's too difficult, right, to observe. You put a rat in a box and run it through mazes to understand rat behavior, right? Because it's way too difficult to actually wander around with a rat at Orgyen Hermitage all day long, right? Watching what it does and how it does, and sort of trying to figure out what its behavior is. You say, oh, it's like too vague, it's not good enough. That's just kind of natural science. We want really hard science. So hard science, what you do is you hypothesize a kind of hypothetical situation that happens in a box, out of context with everything else. In corporate business, we call this externalizing the costs, right? So you kind of, oh yeah, we can make lots and lots of money, and they'll deal with the end product and the pollution and so on. But if we start to actually take in all the costs, all of a sudden it's no longer a business proposition, right? And we say, well, I want to examine consciousness, but I don't want to get all caught up in diet. You go to the oncologist, right? And you say, yeah, what about my diet? Well, what about it? Eat what you like, take these drugs, do this surgery, right? Or it's like, it's too complicated to kind of, and then, yeah, but what about the way my mindset affects the food I eat? I mean, it's good food, but if I have a certain mind state, then it doesn't end up being, oh, this is getting way too complicated to explore. We'll forget about that, and we'll explore this. It's like the drunks looking for the keys under the light, right? Because it's too difficult to find the keys where they lost them, which was out there in the middle of a dark field. You say, why are you looking for the keys here? You sure you lost the keys here? Oh, no, we lost them over there in the dark. And well, why aren't you looking over there? Well, there's more light over here. Well, that's what we humans are like. It's like, it's too complicated to kind of deal with this, but so, look, we'll just do it this way. We'll make a tax break, and that should sort out all our social problems. Well, yeah, we're doing it all the time. Okay? And so in this one, there's this kind of aspiration to not do that, to include all the dharmas, right? Like, how does science, in our culture, how is science revolving with this mystery we call kind of religious belief? Because we've surely got a collision happening, right? I want to understand the world which can see that. Understanding doesn't mean condoning or anything. It means seeing how, because when we understand the generative process more clearly, we can nudge bits of it. You can't nudge bits that you don't even see. Right? There's some freedom of participation comes out of this. So sometimes the Sarva Dharma might mean just in a very kind of Buddhist-y way, right? There are many dharmas of awakening, the 37 factors of enlightenment, the Eightfold Noble Path, with this, the 10 of that, the 52 of that, the 121 of that. And so for the person who's trained in that, it's not necessary for you, but for the person who's trained in it, these are dharmas of life. And so, Samantabhadra is all those dharmas working in and through each other, right? It's all the teachings, the dharma of Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, the Dharma of Karju, Shakya, Nyingma, right, Gelupa, the dharmas of science and religion and art and economics and ecological things. Like it's this aspiration to understand more broadly and profoundly. So we may be emphasizing dharmas, Om Sarva Dharma, right? Om Samantabhadra, Sarva Dharma, Om. And so you might just have that short mantra whilst you're, if you find it helpful. These are just a help, right? Or you begin to see that, in a sense, Samantabhadra is also in your experience associated with this extraordinary, this kind of radically inclusive capacity for love. Mahametta, magnanimous metta, loving kindness, right? That in the sense of universal, if we actually went to love is a reflection of the capacity to accept the legitimacy of another coexisting with oneself, then if that is the way you choose to define it, right, or a way of defining it, then at that point you start to see that the way two cells structurally coupling together to bring forth a tissue, or number of cells structurally coupling, is love in action, because they are not judging or anything. They're accepting the legitimacy, in other words, the fullness of the dynamic that their neighbor is, coexisting with themselves, and together in this state of loving, they bring forth a new world. Right? So Mahametta is not just a kind of a beautiful, holistic, healing emotion that then gets laid on our understanding of Sarva Dharma or Sammakaya. See, the thing about the Sammakaya is it's like Sarva Dharma is like all the dharmas. Sammakaya is all the bodies of experience rolled into one. This Sammakaya, right? It includes the Pilbara, right? Or where the iron ore was manufactured and then sent to Japan, right? And smelted there in Kobe, right? And then spun into a Zen gong, right, in Kyoto, right? And then sold in a spiritual do-it-yourself temple supermarket, right? There's this like a 4-story high department store that specialized in religious paraphernalia, right? and then it required Robin Steinstra to give birth to a son, right, who ended up in Japan, right, and then offered to find me a gong and spent an entire day in the store, right, gonging this. Like in a sense, all these bodies are part of this moment of embodiment, right? There's many, many bodies into one, right? These many, many dharmas in this one, right? This Mahametta is just a different angle of seeing the many dharmas, or seeing the Sammakaya. Vajrabhumi means kind of unshakable ground, and it's really referring to the kind of unshakable ground of everything and every process, right? It's like that the whole of Samantabhadra is grounded in the totality of being and process. And Dharmadhatu, we've already come across, you could say Samantabhadra is the unshakable ground. Samantabhadra is Mahametta. Samantabhadra is Sarva Dharma. Samantabhadra is Sammakaya. Samantabhadra is the Dharmadhatu, right? The total field of all events and meanings. Hum has this sense of there's a kind of pun that's in here, and I it was initiated by Namche Rinpoche for me, and it's somehow become a truth. It's no longer a pun, It's somehow some profound truth. But actually it was just a pun when it began, because it depends how you pronounce this, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, and we were doing psychotherapy in Morocco for 6 months at one point, years and years ago. And in between psychotherapy sessions, people would sort of meditate or do something, and because we didn't have anything else to do except that. And one day I wandered by one guy who I knew was working on tremendous difficulties with his mother, right? Because I was in the same group therapy, right? Group with him, he's kind of struggling with mother things. And he was sitting down doing Chenrezig. And I walked by, and I was kind of completely flabbergasted when I heard what he was chanting. Oh, mommy, take me home. 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 He didn't. I pointed it out to him afterwards. He was flabbergasted. He started going, oh, Mani Padme Hum, but he's doing all this work on his mother, and he ended up, it changed, but he wasn't aware that he changed the mantra, and he's going, oh, Mommy, take me home, right? And interestingly enough, home does have a sense, just like Om is kind of like, almost like it's an open embrace of totality. Home is like, in a sense, bringing the totality home, right? I mean, to pun H-U-M, home, and our English word home, that's a pun. But somehow over the years it's become, almost thought, oh, that's an explanation. I have to remind myself it was just a pun that Namjo made one day. But actually I think it's a very deep association. Proof of this is that guy who was going, oh, Mummy, take me home, right? It was actually, at the time I was young, I was too young to be magnanimous with it. So I was kind of like internally a little bit, yeah, look at that. Like, it was almost like just a demonstration of how messed up he was, right? And it was later that I began to look back and reflect on that and think how wonderful. That was a demonstration of his intelligence, right? Coming out and speaking to him in a deep way and inviting him to exactly what he had to explore, So the hum part is like Om Samantabhadra Sammakaya Sarva Dharma Mahameta Vajrabhumi Dhamma Dhatu Hum, right? It's like, just in case you hadn't been, realized that this was here, you're bringing it home, Sahaja. And Sahaja is a very, it's a very potent, mysterious word mantra, right? Saraha, who is one of the great Mahasiddhas and arguably one of the seed inspirations for what turned into the Mahamudra tradition, and he spoke frequently of co-emergent, right? It means co-emergent, sahaja, right? And the point isn't to say this arises co-emergent with that. It's saying the nature of the universe is co-emergence. Because in a sense, like, we bring forth the things, and then to say they co-emerge with each other, actually before that was the movement. It's like the book of Maxine Sheets-Johnson that I'm reading right now, Primacy of Movement. And she puts forward a radical view. It's a very difficult read because of its academic kind of writing and so on. And so I won't end up recommending it widely, but if you are able to read that kind of writing and you have an interest, it's profound. To me it's as profound and kind of view changing as studying Maturana's work, and because she was a dancer originally. She was her whole profession was movement, but she's also a very smart academic cookie. And so she did a PhD and wrote a book called The Phenomenology of Dance or something. Then she did a second PhD, right, on evolutionary biology. And 88 years of age today, she's still writing books. But the sense that her thesis, to reduce into a nutshell, which isn't very easy to grasp even though it's a nutshell, is that our lived experience is better described as a flow of movement than of things that are moving. And that out of this experienced flow of movement comes our perception of invariant things. It's so in tune with Dharma as far as I'm concerned, right? And so beautifully in tune with Maturana's work, right? But there's a sense of beginning with this. And so, you see, it applies to this sahaja, right? You know, in the beginning there was co-emergence. But you want to say co-emergence of what? Right? But in a sense you could say, could we turn the question around and say, it's what emerges out of the co-emergence, right? The kind of perceived arises out of the inconceivable primacy of movement, the kind of flow of interbeingness, you know. We live in a culture which is really become trapped in the non-recognition that when we try to explain the universe, what we're trying to explain is not the universe of experience, but the universe that we have collaboratively named. And then we do experiments and we try to understand how stars got there. But actually, before the star was there was this universe dancing that bring forth the thing where you saw there was a star that you would like to explain. So it's very difficult to understand the universe because we think we're trying to explain and understand the universe, whereas actually we've been bamboozled into trying to explain our explanations. And most of us have become blinded to the universe that we would actually like to explain, and the only universe that we would like to explain is the universe that we are, the living that we are. And when you look at it that way, I illustrated this a number of days ago. You know, if you remember someone that you really like and care for, who's not present, right? And then you do a little experiment and remember someone who you don't particularly like or you're not particularly wanting to be with, and just look at your experience. Most people don't just see suddenly a kind of photograph comes up of the person they like, as opposed to a photograph that comes up of the person that they don't like. If you really look at your experience, you'll go, when you know, your whole organism moves, that movement of the organism is part of your experience of liking that person. And that movement of your organism and the metabolism and the heartbeat and so on changes if that's with the person of not liking the organism, right? And that our phenomenology is to really look into what's happening. Am I moving my arm, or is my actual experience of moving, which involves, if I really try to describe it well, I have to describe everything, right? And again, it's too difficult to describe our experience because, you know, I'm describing my experience, and by the time I get to the end of the sentence, I've already moved on from how I was at the beginning of the sentence. And so it's impossible to talk about really in detail. And so we just say, oh, well, I won't bother talking about what's actually going on. Let's have a conversation about some completely constructed artificial universe and then sweat and worry and concern ourselves about understanding how the universe that is just these concepts came into being, or how it passed out of being. And meanwhile, we don't pay any attention to our lived experience. And this is, each one of us is, she points out, everyone is born moving. You know, you're not stillborn. Everyone who can raise this question was not stillborn, right? And the type of moving that you did was inseparable from your growing a capacity to know the world the way you know it today. You know, it's like the journey of our life was in the moving that we're doing. And so this, right, sahaja, right, it's kind of like the co-emergence, if you like, of the Sammakaya, the Sarvadharma, the Mahametta, the Vajrabhumi, these are different aspects, the unshakableness of it, the totality of it, the love of it, the dharmas of it, the embodiments of it, and yet none of it is just that, and this is, right, sahaja. And in some of the songs of Saraha, which I think kind of ironic, Saraha sounds a bit like sahaja, right, you know, it's almost as if reading it, as if he was saying that, you know, Mahamudra meditation is to realize Mahamudra meditation is to realize, contemplate, be sahaja. You know, and this is, in a very ordinary sense, this is, we're all in this together. Sahaja. Right? There's many different ways. Right? Would you like to say anything, or, right? It's like you take the mantra, you don't have to work with the mantra, and sometimes people not particularly wanting to work with mantra, but if you feel that it would be useful, you know, then think of the mantra as a way of just continuously inviting your curiosity into that particular angle of understanding the universe. Right? Or if you like, if you've got a feeling for it, all of it together. Right? And then investigate, beginning with where you are, and then expanding into how that might have come from the past, recognizing that how you are is constructing the past that you're capable of seeing, right? In order to use that past as an explanation of how you came to be how you are. And, you know, so in other words, what I'm saying is it's not meditation on each one of these, it's not studying, it's not about studying Maturana's work or studying Damasio's work or studying anybody else's work. It's a matter of moving from your own experience. And if you have interests in these areas, the Tibetans managed to have an incredibly rich system without talking about anything that I've just talked about. But in a sense they did. They were pointing at it, but, you know, the details of the language were different. You know, and you talk about an emergence of, emerging, if you like, of form and emptiness. Right, or awareness and emptiness, or bliss and emptiness. But really, as an explanation of how the universe is happening, for most of us in this modern day, to say, well, I'll explain the universe, it's a union of bliss and emptiness, or it's form and emptiness, it's not quite satisfying enough. We want a bit more detail. And we want to be able to. They describe the universe in terms of their prior experience, their prior personal experience emerging in a cultural experience. And we explain our experience through the same thing, our personal experience emerging in a cultural experience, social experience. But our social experience can involve East, Buddhism from the East, Buddhism from Tibet, right? Science and inquiry, right, from the Middle East, right? Very hugely initiated by people who practiced Islam, right? Our mathematics, our hard science, because mathematics is hard science, right? All grew out of that, right? Our science grew out of a reaction to against simplistic religious beliefs that were used to justify authoritarianism. Right? Our social kind of knowledge involves all of this. And so if we're going to meaningfully talk about an integrative way of being in the world, we can't leave out large parts. You can't leave out any part of your own experience, right? That's called denial. That's called, suppression. That was a long class, but as I say, I could have said heaps more. Just take a small detail and study the entire origin of life and consciousness and material and so on according to Western biology. A little 3-year detour or whatever. Right? It's a hint. Yeah.
A really basic question, but it's about mantra.
Yes.
And I use it a lot. I find it really useful. But I'm Westernized English, and it's a language that doesn't mean anything to me, except your explanations.
Yeah.
Get in the flow of using those words. Am I just creating space in my being, my mind, my thinking, for a deeper wisdom to emerge, that already exists? Or is it the actual juice and meaning of the words that somehow speak to another part of me that's not my Western, my ordinary cortex?
If your goal of this meditation is to just use the various facets of the meditation as a focus in order to experience a deepening of integrated calm, right? Then you could sort of just repeat fried eggs and bacon over and over and over again. You could recite Mary Has a Little Lamb. You could recite a jingle. You could recite Om Mani Padme Hum. It doesn't matter what you recite, but it does matter to you what you recite, because you'll find that because of your kind of emotional feeling for it and the feeling for the word and so on, somehow it speaks to you. You're able to work with this, but not with that. And in a sense, you can sort of mumble the mantra like meaningless sound. It's pure sound. So it's like, I might be, and I do this, I'm kind of ultrasound massage inside my body. It's calming. I might meditate every breath on the exhalation, and so on. So this is a mantra it's disconnected from conceptual meaning, right? Doesn't have any, and it serves a purpose, right? If that's your purpose, then treating the mantra as the meaning's not important, right? The sound, it's in no case is it that there is some esoteric inner blessing truth that you don't know about, that if you just say this mantra and pronounce it right, you will receive the blessing. That is an extraordinarily limited, short-sighted view of what mantra is, right? So it does matter what it means, when it doesn't matter what it means, it's not because the meaning is working, the true meaning is still working on you. It's your intention. So your intention is for calming. But if your intention is for expanding your discernment of the detail of how the universe is dancing into being, then it's helpful to have little reminders because you're integrating the whole of your being, and a major part of your being is a kind of the part that's involved in conversation and verbalizing with others and within yourself. It's just, that's in place, that's there. So if I don't join that with the theme I'm studying, then maybe all my verbalization is totally about the theme I'm studying, but sometimes it's not, right? So I'm sort of like meditating on Samantabhadra, just silently like this. But mentally, I've got this kind of just quiet conversation about, and this is really great. And then after the retreat, I can go and meet that person and tell them all about these wonderful experiences that you can have while you're meditating on Samantabhadra. So you've got speech going on in your being, but it's not being integrated with other things that are going on in your being. In the most skillful path of awakening is to integrate all of our functionings in a common collaboration, right? So, for example, I might have Om Samantabhadra, and slowly, I'm meditating over the years on this kind of, what is Samantabhadra? What is Samantabhadra? And I'm starting to get a feeling of Samantabhadra. And Samantabhadra is a very handy noise, right? Because you can say Samantabhadra. And then you could say, what is Samantabhadra? And write a 400-page book, right? So if I was going to go, Om, blah, 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 and sort of chant the whole 400-page book every time I say it, it's very convenient to say Samantabhadra. And just as you can think of this friend that you really care for who's not here, and not only do you think of them, it's not just a word, that word invokes metabolic shifts in your functioning. You gradually, in a sense, make sense of this word. I mean, we didn't learn language by having words defined. We learned languaging by kind of copying and grunting and experimenting, and then gradually associating that with global physiological functionings and relationships with others. And together the word gets associated with us until the word, in a sense, means that. And so you have to learn what Samantabhadra means for you, right? And then maybe by Om Samantabhadra Sammakaya Hum, it's kind of like just this, remember all kayas. This is the aspect I'm looking at. Keeps on reminding me. It's just like bringing me in. What is all kayas? It's a way of holding a question. You know what I mean? Like it's a simple little phrase, but it's a way of holding a question. This is where, there are some mantras where every word, it's a mantra of meaning, right? So every word can be translated, it can mean something. And then there's mantras that are, they call them pure mantras, because they're just bija mantras, or seed syllable mantras. And they're completely untranslatable. Om, ah, hum. I mean, we can talk lots of body, speech, and mind, but it doesn't mean body, speech, and mind. They're just sounds that we work with, right? That's like using the sound to help calm or help bring integration or what have you. And then there's what we call mixed mantras, right? Where there might be, and a lot of mantras are mixed, right? So you go Om, that's kind of meaningless, so to speak. It's not meaningless, but it's not translatable. And you go Hum, it's not translatable, but all the rest is. In between, there's this translatable, right? And it's inviting us to, like, if you go Om Samantabhadra, when I'm practicing, it's like, when I go Om Samantabhadra Sammakaya Hum, that's inviting me to go, what do I mean by Samantabhadra? It doesn't actually so much invite an assumption of what Samantabhadra is already, and then the assumption that that's what it is. It's going, there's a mystery here. What do they mean by? I've got a sense that when we're in this language, we're meeting with philosophers and poets and the scientists of that time, right, who were really grappling with trying to understand how the universe works. These are concepts for profound question, right? And so we're holding the mind in that place of questioning in a profound way for us, right? And so, gradually, you can use English words. I mean, someone once asked, why do we have to visualize Chenrezig in flowing robes? We don't wear flowing robes. So I said to them, well, okay, you visualize Chenrezig in a three-piece business suit. That's okay. And then they came back later and said, I prefer the robes. Right? It's sort of like, you're not visualizing some reality that's there. You are engaging in profound kind of interior participation in encouraging your organism to function in more inclusive ways, right? So it's kind of a technology, but it's soft in the sense that we kind of gently catch a monkey. So, if you wanted to translate everything into English and say, Om, the totality of the universe, all the bodies hum, sure, go ahead if that works for you, And David Peat, who was a colleague of David Bowman, he used to come and study with us in Ottawa, and once I was having lunch with him, and he took me into his bedroom and showed me on his wall. He had this huge kind of mathematical chemical equation, and it was done. It was quite a beautiful piece of, it was sort of artwork, and the equation was there, and a lot of numbers and lists of numbers with like decimal point, all this kind, completely incomprehensible to me. And he said, you spend all that time chanting mantras and visualizing Chenrezig, and he said, I do exactly the same thing with this, right? And because he's, he's a practicing, quantum physicist, and for him, this equation, which he didn't try to explain to me, but for him, it invoked a sense of an evolving mystery of the entire universe, and everything was it was a cipher for him. That's so precious to find a cipher for ourselves, that when we think of that, it goes, right? It brings us into that kind of vivid curiosity and inquiry and awakening. So in this sense, we're inviting the possibility of joining our verbalizing skills with our non-verbalizing skills and our kind of sensitivity skills of feeling how, when you're kind of conceiving of the full universe, and then this kind of ripple and a shift in the kind of kinesthetic felt sense of being, and you recognize it as fear. Right? And it's like you realize that in this kind of, it's so big, the organism response isn't like one of it's like, whoa, it's like, interesting, didn't expect that, right? And then you learn how to do that more gently, so you don't drive yourself into kind of dysfunctional fear, but you can be just on that edge of delicious, not quite knowing, but exciting discovery, right? And discovering questions that you never thought of asking before. That's the most exciting thing that I find. Most exciting discovery I ever make in my life now is questions that I've not thought of asking before. That's putting it into verbal expression. That's why I appreciate Streets Johnson's work and Maturana's work and so on, because in involving myself with their work, I realized I never quite asked it that way, It's like there's an angle on it. And where I can see I didn't ask it that way reveals an assumption that I had. And this is so exciting to find this, because this is like suddenly there's movement, suddenly there's growth, right? So it's not necessary to work with the mantra, and in this, where I'm kind of bridging, if you like, between what could be expressed in complete kind of Western idiom, but I'm bridging it with the great tradition of Mahayana and Buddhism and so on, because this is what my life is, and because I feel that there's lots of people that it's to a degree their life as well, and so it's something that's shareable, right? But it's not, if it, like, you work with what you work with. Don't bother working with what you don't work with. You know, in a sense.
I've used mantra a lot and found it incredibly valuable, and it's a very basic question that I ask, I know, but...
And as I say, sometimes you might use just make a short mantra, you know, like a part of it, like I have Om Samakaya, right? Om Samantabhadra Samakaya Home, or whatever. Or sometimes you're doing the whole thing. Om Samantabhadra Samakaya Sarvanama Mahameta Vajra Bhumi Namanadu Om Sahaja. I'm not thinking of any of it, but it's like a feeling for some extraordinary totality and going out. And I mean, for me, I'll work with mantra, and in a sense, what I consider good work with mantra is that I'll have a feeling of expanding and expanding, 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 and then all of a sudden, the mantra stops, or I stop saying it because it's too crude. I'm just there, breathing, right, in the experience. I don't need the mantra to draw my attention to it. You know, it's become. Right, you've gone deeper than that. So it's like it's a mano tra. Mano is mind, tra is tool. It's one of the. It's a mind tool to support a deepening of tranquility and clear, discerning engagement, which means question. You know, samatha vipassana. Yeah. So. By the power of these wholesome activities, may our lives be rich with awakening. Living thus, may we abandon all unwholesomeness through the endless storm of birth, illness, old age, and death. May we help all beings to realize their true nature. Sarvamangala.